The key felt cold in my hand, a cheap piece of metal that weighed more than our entire family home. It wasn't the key to a new chapter or a fresh start. It was the key to a 10 by 10 concrete box where my life was expected to shrink, to be filed away and forgotten, all under the guise of maternal help. My mother, Susan, pressed it into my palm with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "There," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, like honey meant to hide the taste of medicine. "This will help you downsize, sweetie. Get organized." She said organized as if my existence was a mess she was finally cleaning up. We were standing in my childhood bedroom, or what was left of it. Brown cardboard boxes were stacked against the walls, labeled in my own handwriting, books, winter clothes, memories. Each one felt like a tombstone for a part of me that no longer had a place here. The air was thick with the scent of packing tape and finality. Through the thin wall, I could hear my sister, Chloe, on the phone in her room, what used to be the guest room. She was laughing, her voice a bright, effortless sound that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of my space. "No, the master is huge," Chloe chirped, and my stomach tightened. "Mom and Dad are moving into the smaller room downstairs. They said I need the space for all my things when I come back from school." She wasn't just getting a room, she was getting an upgrade. A promotion. Meanwhile, I was getting a storage unit. My job had transferred me back to the city temporarily, and I had asked if I could stay for a few months to save up. My mother's solution was this: to systematically erase my presence to make way for Chloe's triumphant, part-time return from college. Susan's hand lingered on my shoulder, a gesture that was supposed to be comforting but felt like a brand. "It's just so much clutter, Maya. You'll feel so much lighter once this is all packed away." She wasn't talking about the stuff. She was talking about me. I looked at the box labeled Memories. Inside were old photo albums, my high school track medals, the worn teddy bear I'd slept with until I was 10. These weren't just things, they were proof that I had lived here, that I had once belonged. My mother saw where I was looking and her smile tightened. "We can't be sentimental about everything. Space is a premium." She said it like a landlord, not a mother. Every word was a perfectly polished stone, smooth on the surface but designed to cause a deep, internal bruise. The key in my hand suddenly felt sharp, its edges digging into my skin. It was a physical reminder of my new status in this house: temporary, inconvenient, and easily stored away. I was being relegated to an off-site facility. Chloe's laughter echoed again, this time followed by her talking about paint swatches for her new walls. She was planning a future in the very space I was being asked to vacate. My room, my history, was being painted over in a shade of her choosing. Susan patted my arm one last time, a final, dismissive gesture. "I already paid for the first 3 months," she added, as if this were an act of profound generosity. "Just to help you get on your feet." But she wasn't helping me up, she was pushing me out the door. I stared at the 4 walls that had held all my secrets, my tears, and my dreams. They seemed to be closing in on me, whispering that I had overstayed my welcome. The room already felt like it wasn't mine anymore. I closed my fingers around the key, the cold seeping into my bones. I wasn't just downsizing my belongings. I was being asked to downsize my worth, to pack myself into a box and agree that I was taking up too much space. My mother left, closing the door softly behind her, leaving me alone with the boxes and the key. The silence she left behind was louder than any argument. It was the sound of my place in this family being quietly, efficiently, and permanently deleted. This dynamic wasn't new. It was the very architecture of our family, the foundation upon which every memory was built. Chloe was the sun, I was the planet that silently orbited her, my gravity useful only to keep things from flying into chaos, but my surface always left in the shadows. I remember our childhood birthdays. For Chloe's 10th, my parents rented a pony. A real, live pony that gave rides to all her friends in our backyard. The photos from that day are legendary in our family albums, filled with sunshine and Chloe's bright, toothy grin as she sat atop the saddle like a tiny queen. For my 10th birthday, 3 months earlier, I had asked for a specific telescope. I'd circled it in a catalog for weeks. Instead, I got a sensible sweater and a book on practical hobbies. My father, Mark, had patted my head and said, "Astronomy is a bit lonely, don't you think?" The message was clear, my interests were strange, hers were celebratory. My mother was the artist of this imbalance. She never used cruel words, only sharp, honey-coated observations that chipped away at my confidence. My straight A's were met with a nod and a, "Good, Maya, just make sure you're not all work and no play." Chloe's C+ average was praised with, "She has such a vibrant social life, she's so well-rounded." My father, on the other hand, was a ghost in his own home. He was a creature of silence, his approval demonstrated by a lack of disapproval. When Susan would praise Chloe for breathing, he would nod along. When she would offer me a piece of helpful advice that was really a critique, he would simply pick up his newspaper, his silence a form of silent agreement. His passivity was its own kind of wound. Allowed injustice, you can fight. You can yell back, you can defend yourself. But how do you fight a wall of quiet indifference? His silence told me that my feelings weren't worth the trouble of a single word. The pattern bled into everything. When I got my first job at 16 to save for a car, my parents praised my work ethic. But the money I saved was my own. When Chloe wanted a car 2 years later, they bought her a brand new one for her high school graduation, claiming it was a necessary investment in her safety. My independence was expected, her dependence was enabled. I learned early on to rely only on myself, to fix my own problems, to fund my own dreams. It made me responsible and resourceful, but it also made me feel profoundly alone, like a guest in my own family. Chloe could do no wrong. The time she snuck out and crashed my father's car resulted in a week of mild disappointment, followed by relief that she was okay. The time I missed my curfew by 10 minutes because my study group ran late, I was grounded for a month for being irresponsible. The standards were never the same. She was graded on a curve, I was judged against an impossibly high standard. She was art, meant to be beautiful and admired. I was utility, meant to be functional and quiet. Any needs I had were an inconvenience. It was a quiet, suffocating injustice that you couldn't point to in a single moment. It was 1,000 tiny cuts, a million little betrayals that added up to a gaping wound. It was the way my mother's eyes would light up when Chloe entered a room, and the way they'd skim past me. This is why the storage unit didn't feel like a sudden act of cruelty. It was the natural progression of my role in this family. I was the reliable daughter, the one who wouldn't make a fuss, the one who could be counted on to quietly pack her life into boxes and disappear. They knew I wouldn't scream or cry or throw a tantrum. Chloe would have, and she would have been given the master suite plus a sincere apology. I was predictable in my quiet endurance of their neglect. I was the foundation. She was the view. My purpose was to be solid, unseen, and stable, so she could be the dazzling part of the house that everyone admired. A foundation isn't supposed to have needs of its own. And so, I was being moved to the basement, or worse, to an off-site location. Because the showcase piece, the darling daughter, needed more room to shine. And a good foundation never complains when the weight on top of it gets heavier. The red flags were there, fluttering in my peripheral vision long before the key was placed in my hand. They were subtle at first, small enough to be dismissed as sensitivity or overthinking, a label my mother was always quick to apply to me whenever I questioned the family narrative. It started with a phone call when I first asked to come home. After my lease ended and the job transfer was confirmed, I called my mom, expecting a simple, warm, of course. Instead, there was a beat of silence on the other end of the line, a hesitation that lasted only a second but felt like an eternity. "Oh. For how long, sweetie?" she'd asked. Her tone was light, but the question itself was the first flag. It wasn't "welcome home," it was "what's your exit strategy?" I explained it was just for a few months, to get my bearings, and she'd recovered quickly, cloaking the question in logistical concern. When I arrived, my room felt off. It was clean, too clean. The specific way I left my books on my nightstand was gone, replaced by a generic, decorative lamp I'd never seen before. A framed photo of my college friends had been taken off my desk and put in a drawer. It felt less like my room and more like a guest room they were temporarily letting me use. Then came the constant, casual mentions of Chloe. Every conversation seemed to circle back to her. "Chloe is thinking of taking up pottery, you know. She'll need so much space for a wheel," my mother would say out of nowhere, while I was just trying to drink my morning coffee. Each mention felt like a carefully placed chess piece, maneuvering me into a corner. They were building a case for Chloe's needs that were always presented as grander, more important, and more deserving of space than my simple existence. The biggest red flag was a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I was coming downstairs late one night to get a glass of water and heard my parents talking in the living room. My mother's voice was low and strategic. "It's just not sustainable, Mark. With all of Chloe's art supplies and her furniture, where will it all go?" My father's reply was a tired sigh. "I know, Susan. I know." There was no defense of me, no suggestion that I, too, was their child and had a right to be there. There was only weary agreement. I was a problem to be solved, a logistical hurdle on the way to accommodating Chloe's comfort. A few days later, I found a brochure on the kitchen counter. It was for a local self-storage facility, a glossy pamphlet advertising clean, secure, affordable space. It was placed right next to the mail, almost innocently, but I knew my mother. Nothing she did was without intention. When I asked her about it, she waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, that? I was just thinking we could all benefit from a good decluttering. Spring cleaning, you know." But her eyes flicked towards my things, the extra box I had in the hallway, the coat that was hanging on the rack. The weave was a lie. She meant me. The talk of minimalism became a constant theme, but it was a philosophy applied only to me. She'd pick up a souvenir from my travels and say, "Do you really need this, Maya? It's all about experiences, not things." Yet, she spoke with reverence about the massive antique armoire Chloe wanted to bring home from a flea market. I started to feel like a ghost in my own home, my presence tolerated rather than welcomed. I began making myself smaller, quieter. I'd stay in my room most of the evening, trying to take up as little physical and emotional space as possible, hoping it would be enough. My dad started avoiding eye contact with me. He would busy himself with the television or his iPad whenever I entered a room. The guilt was rolling off him in waves, but he lacked the courage to voice it, to stand up to my mother's quiet, relentless campaign to push me out. The final red flag came a week before the key. My mom asked me to help her clean out the garage. As we worked, she pointed to an old, dusty armchair of mine. "We should really get rid of this. It's just collecting dust." That chair was the one I'd read in for hours as a teenager. She was testing me, seeing how much I'd let go of without a fight. I knew then that I was on borrowed time. Every conversation, every suggestion, every brochure was a step towards my displacement. They weren't just making room for Chloe, they were actively, strategically, and unapologetically unmaking room for me. The betrayal wasn't a quiet suggestion in a dusty garage. It was a formal announcement, delivered over Sunday dinner. My mother chose the moment with surgical precision, right after she'd served the roast chicken, the kind of meal meant to signify family, warmth, and togetherness. A total lie. She cleared her throat, and the table fell silent. My father froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. Chloe looked up from her phone, sensing a performance. My mother beamed, a spotlight-seeking smile that I knew always preceded a proclamation. "I have some wonderful news," she began, looking at me. "Maya, honey, I know you've been worried about all your things and feeling a bit cramped. So, I took care of it. I found the perfect solution to help you get organized and feel more independent." My heart started to pound a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. I knew this was it. This was the moment the subtext became text. The air grew thick, and I felt like I was watching a scene from a movie, completely disconnected from my own body. "I went ahead and booked a storage unit for you, just a few miles from here," she announced, her voice dripping with counterfeit pride. "It's brand new, climate-controlled, and I paid for the first 3 months. It's my gift to you. To help you downsize." There it was. That word again. Downsize. Not store your extra things, but downsize. As if my life, my history, my very presence needed to be condensed into a more manageable, less intrusive package. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at Chloe for some sign of solidarity, some flicker of outrage on my behalf. Instead, her face lit up. "Oh, that's amazing, Mom," she said, her voice genuine. "That's so smart. Then I'll have enough room for my easel by the window when I get the new bedroom." The new bedroom. She said it so casually, so thoughtlessly. My humiliation was merely a logistical stepping stone to her comfort. She wasn't being cruel, she was just being Chloe, a girl who had never once had to consider the space someone else had to lose for her to gain. Then, I made the mistake of looking at my father. He was staring intently at his plate, cutting his chicken into microscopic pieces. He refused to meet my gaze. In his silence, I heard everything he was too cowardly to say. "Just go along with it. Don't make waves. This is easier." His silence was the deepest betrayal of all. I tried to find my voice, but it felt trapped in my throat. "A storage unit?" I finally managed to whisper, the words feeling like sand in my mouth. I don't have that much stuff. I thought this was temporary." My mother's smile became a mask of condescending pity. "It is temporary, sweetie. This just makes it more comfortable for everyone." Her eyes swept across the table, landing on Chloe, then my father, and pointedly skipping over me. I was not included in the everyone. Then came the final, crushing blow. Susan folded her hands, looking like a benevolent queen addressing her court. "And since we're making these positive changes, your father and I have decided to give Chloe the master suite. It has the best light for her art, and we're getting too old to be climbing all those stairs anyway." It was all laid bare in that one, breathtakingly cruel moment. One daughter was being given the largest, most coveted space in the house. The other was being given a key to a metal box. The public demotion was complete. I wasn't just being moved out, I was being replaced by a bigger, better version of a daughter. Chloe squealed with delight, getting up to hug my mother. My father managed a weak, pathetic smile. And I just sat there, frozen. My entire being felt like it had been hollowed out, leaving nothing but a ringing silence. My mother then reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the key, sliding it across the polished wood of the table towards me. It stopped right beside my plate. It looked obscene, lying there next to the meal I could no longer eat. The weight of their collective gaze was suffocating. They were all looking at me, waiting. Waiting for me to accept my lot, to take the key and thank my mother for her generosity. Waiting for me to be the good, quiet daughter I had always been. And in that moment, I hated myself for it. I didn't pick up the key. I left it there on the table, a tiny silver monument to my own insignificance. I simply pushed my chair back, the sound scraping against the hardwood floor, a harsh, ugly noise in the otherwise celebratory atmosphere. 3 pairs of eyes watched me. My mother's held a flicker of annoyance, her perfect scene disrupted. Chloe's held confused indifference. My father's, well, he wouldn't look at me, so I'll never know. His gaze remained fixed on his plate. "Maya, where are you going?" "We're not done with dinner," my mother said, her voice tight with forced pleasantness. It wasn't a question born of concern. It was an order to sit back down, to stop making a scene, to swallow my humiliation along with the cold chicken. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My voice was gone, packed away in a box I hadn't even sealed yet. I turned and walked out of the dining room, each step feeling strangely heavy, as if I were wading through water. I went back to my room and closed the door. The click of the latch was the loudest sound in the world. It was the sound of surrender. I slid down the door, my back pressed against the wood, and finally let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. There were no tears. Tears would have suggested there was something left to be sad about, some hope that had been dashed. But there was nothing. The space inside my chest where feelings used to be was just a vast, quiet, hollow ache. I sat there on the floor, surrounded by the ghosts of my own life stacked in cardboard boxes. My reflection stared back at me from the dark screen of my television. The girl on the screen looked like a stranger, her face pale and empty. This is what it felt like to be erased. Not with a shout, but with a smile and a key. To be told, in the kindest, most loving way possible, that you do not matter. That your space, your history, and your heart are all subject to forfeiture. My mother thought she was being generous. In her mind, she had solved a problem efficiently. She had tidied up the mess that was my life, my needs, my presence. She couldn't see that in doing so, she had broken the one thing I thought was unbreakable, my sense of belonging. I looked at my hands, resting in my lap. They seemed so useless. They had worked hard, they had saved money, they had built a life for themselves, only to end up here, packing that same life away because it was deemed an inconvenience. I didn't shatter. I just emptied. It was a silent collapse, an implosion. The structures that held me up inside, the belief that I was loved, that I had a place, that I was a daughter and not just an obligation, all of it turned to dust, leaving a void. After a long time, I got up. My movements were stiff, robotic. I walked over to the half-packed box labeled Memories. Without any thought, I began placing the rest of the items inside. The track medals, the old photographs, the worn teddy bear. There was no sentimentality now. The objects had lost their meaning. They weren't proof of a life lived anymore. They were just clutter. My mother was right. It was all just clutter, and it was time to be put away. I worked through the night, a silent machine of efficiency. I didn't stop to rest or think. Thinking was dangerous. Feeling was impossible. The only thing to do was to pack, to label, to tape. To complete the task I had been assigned. By morning, the room was bare, except for the bed. The boxes were stacked neatly by the door, ready for their journey to the concrete box that awaited them. I had downsized myself into a perfectly manageable, easily transportable collection of containers. I had done exactly what they wanted. The storage facility was as soulless as I felt. A maze of identical hallways painted a depressing industrial gray, lit by buzzing fluorescent lights. Each metal door was a copy of the next, a testament to lives paused and put on hold. My father helped me unload the boxes from his truck, the two of us working in a thick, uncomfortable silence. He didn't offer apologies or explanations. He just lifted and carried, his face a mask of strained neutrality. He was trying to frame this as a normal father-daughter activity, like we were moving me into a college dorm. The dissonance was nauseating. This wasn't a beginning, it was a burial. We stacked the last box inside the unit, a small, 10 by 10 cage. It was filled with the neatly labeled containers of my life. My father, seeing his duty done, mumbled something about having to get back and quickly left, leaving me alone in the sterile hallway. He couldn't get away fast enough. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the pile of boxes. This was it. The sum of my existence in this family, condensed into a few dozen cubic feet. I was officially decluttered from their lives. The door to the unit was open, a dark, gaping mouth. As I reached into my pocket to pull out my phone, the storage unit key fell out, clattering loudly on the concrete floor. The sharp, metallic sound echoed in the silence, startling me out of my numb trance. It was the first loud noise I had registered in what felt like days. I bent down and picked it up. The key from the dinner table. The symbol of my demotion. I stared at it, a simple object that carried the weight of so much cruelty. And as I looked at it, something inside me, something I thought was dead and buried, began to stir. It wasn't sadness. Sadness was a luxury I could no longer afford. It was something else, a slow, hot burn starting deep in my gut. It was rage. A pure, clarifying anger that cut through the fog of my despair like a bolt of lightning. This wasn't just unfair. It was a violation. They hadn't just asked me to move my things. They had orchestrated a campaign of psychological warfare to make me feel so worthless that I would do it myself, that I would agree to my own erasure. And I had. Driven by this new, unfamiliar fire, I walked over to the box labeled Memories and tore open the tape. My hands were shaking, not from weakness, but from fury. I rummaged inside, past the photos and the teddy bear, until my fingers found it, an old greeting card. It was from my high school graduation, from my father. Inside, in his neat, careful handwriting, it said, "Maya, you make us proud every single day. Never stop reaching for the stars." The hypocrisy of those words struck me so hard it felt like a physical blow. Where was that man now? That father who was proud of me? He was gone, replaced by a coward who couldn't even look me in the eye as he dumped my life into a concrete box. He hadn't just forgotten these words, he had actively chosen to betray them. And my mother, with her poisonous kindness, framing this expulsion as an act of love. She didn't just favor Chloe, she enjoyed the power it gave her. The power to build one daughter up by tearing the other one down. This wasn't just neglect, it was a deliberate, calculated cruelty. I looked around the cold, empty storage unit again. They intended this place to be my shame. A box to hold the things, and the person, they didn't have room for. They thought this was the end of my story, a final, quiet footnote. But as I stood there, holding that key, the discovery settled over me. They were wrong. This wasn't a tomb. It wasn't a cage. It was a blank slate. It was the only place in my life that was completely, 100% mine, untouched by their expectations or disappointments. For the first time, the key in my hand didn't feel like a shackle. It felt like a weapon. They had given me a space away from them, a place where they couldn't see me. They had no idea what I might build in the dark. My revenge didn't begin with a confrontation. It began with a decision, made under the buzzing fluorescent lights of the storage facility. I looked at the boxes, the monuments to a life I was supposed to miss, and I felt nothing. No nostalgia, no sadness. Just the cold, hard realization that they were anchors. So I opened my laptop, right there on a stack of boxes, and I began to sell everything. The armchair I once loved, the desk where I did my homework, the collection of books I had carefully curated since I was a child. Each online listing was a quiet snip of a thread connecting me to them. The box labeled Memories was the last to go. I didn't even open it. I sold it as a single lot, a box of vintage ephemera, to an artist online. I imagined she would use my photos and medals to create something new, and the thought didn't hurt. It felt right. My past was now someone else's raw material. The process was methodical, almost surgical. There was no emotion in it, only purpose. I was liquidating my old life, converting the sentimental value they had weaponized against me into actual, tangible capital. The kind of capital that buys freedom. With every sale notification that pinged on my phone, I felt lighter. I wasn't just emptying the storage unit, I was emptying myself of the girl who waited for their approval. The girl who would have kept those boxes for years, hoping one day they'd be welcomed back into the family home. With the money from the sales, combined with my own fierce savings, I did something they never thought I could do on my own. I put a down payment on a small studio apartment. It was on the other side of the city, in a neighborhood vibrant with life, a place they would never think to look for me. Signing the lease was the first real breath of fresh air I'd had in months. The pen in my hand felt powerful. This wasn't a key being pressed into my palm in an act of charity, this was a contract I had earned, a space I had claimed. My revenge was woven in silence. I didn't announce my move. My parents would send sporadic, self-serving texts. Hope the organizing is going well. From my mother. Or a generic, hope you're doing okay, from my father. They weren't questions. They were roll calls, checking to see if I was still dutifully playing my part. I didn't reply. Not with anger, not with explanations. I just let their messages float in the digital ether, unanswered. My silence was a void where their influence used to be. It was a language they didn't understand, and it drove them crazy. Freed from the weight of their judgment, something inside me unlocked. At work, my focus became sharp, my ideas clear. I poured all the energy I had once spent navigating my family's toxic dynamics into my projects. I started to excel, to be noticed for my own merit. I volunteered to lead a difficult project that everyone else was avoiding. I worked tirelessly, not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. And I succeeded. The quiet satisfaction of that achievement was 1,000 times more fulfilling than any praise they had ever withheld from me. Then, almost 3 months after the Sunday dinner, the inevitable text from my mother arrived. It was crafted with her signature passive aggression. "Hi sweetie, just a reminder the storage unit payment is due next week. Let me know what you want to do." She was expecting a call. She was expecting me to be in a panic, asking for her help, dependent on her again. She was expecting the sad, little girl she had exiled to come crawling back. She was reasserting her control. I looked at the text message on my phone. I was sitting in my own apartment, drinking coffee from a mug I had bought myself, looking out at a view that was entirely mine. I thought for a moment about all the things I could say. Instead, I typed back a simple, 7-word reply. "That won't be necessary. I've emptied it." I hit send. No explanation. No anger. Just a calm, simple statement of fact. My revenge wasn't loud. It was a quiet, clean, and complete removal of their power over me. My 7-word text message was a bomb detonated in complete silence. There was no immediate reply. No angry phone call. For the first time, I had presented my mother with a situation she couldn't control or manipulate, and her only response was a profound, deafening silence. For days, I heard nothing. The quiet from their end was no longer a punishment, as it had been in my childhood. It was a victory. It was the sound of their power dissolving. They had written me out of their script, and I had simply walked off the set and started my own production. My new life began to take shape, piece by piece. My studio apartment wasn't large, but it was a sanctuary. Every book on the shelf, every cup in the kitchen, every picture on the wall was chosen by me, for me. It was a space built on self-worth, not on seeking the approval of others. I thrived in the quiet. I discovered I liked the person I was when I wasn't constantly bracing for the next small injustice, the next backhanded compliment. I was calm. I was focused. I was, for the first time in my life, genuinely happy. Several months later, an invitation arrived. An engraved cardstock anomaly in my mailbox. It was for Chloe's college graduation party, to be held at my parents' house. My first instinct was to throw it away, to protect the peace I had fought so hard to build. But then I realized, I wasn't that girl anymore. I wasn't the girl who had to hide. Going back wasn't about seeking reconciliation. It was about seeing the ruins of my old life from a position of strength. It was about closure, on my terms. So I went. I drove my own car, parked on the street I grew up on, and walked up to the front door that was no longer mine. When my mother opened it, her smile faltered for a second. I was not the broken, downsized daughter she had last seen. I was a visitor. The house felt smaller than I remembered. Chloe was holding court in the living room, showing off her diploma. She looked happy, but the master suite she had inherited now just looked like a bigger, more cluttered version of her old room. My father gave me an awkward nod from across the room, a ghost haunted by his own choices. My mother tried to pull me into the fold, to reclaim her power. Maya, everyone, look. She's here. We've missed you. Her words were for the audience, a performance of a loving, united family. But the words were hollow, and we all knew it. I was polite, distant. I congratulated Chloe, I accepted a glass of water, and I observed the life that had continued on without me. A life I no longer felt any connection to. It was like watching a movie about people I used to know. I saw the empty space where my reading chair once sat. I glanced up the stairs toward my old bedroom. Nothing. No ache, no sting of betrayal. Just a quiet sense of detachment. The discovery I made in that storage unit had been permanent. They wanted me to downsize. Instead, I just outgrew them. Their world, with its petty power plays and its conditional love, had become too small for me. I had built a bigger one for myself. After a respectable 45 minutes, I decided it was time to leave. My mother walked me to the door, her desperation palpable. "We should do this more often," she said, a last-ditch effort to pull me back into orbit. "I'm glad you're doing well," I replied, my voice calm and even. It was the truth, and it was a goodbye. As I walked to my car, I pulled out my keys. The single, shiny key to my apartment gleamed under the evening sky. The ugly, cheap key to the storage unit was a distant memory, a symbol of a life I had successfully shed. The front door of their house closed behind me, but for the first time in my life, I knew I was the one on the outside with the better view.